unlimited drama series.
The waitress couldn't have been more than 25, with that fresh-faced look that screamed college debt and big dreams. She placed the whiskey sour in front of me with a smile that made my 49-year-old heart skip a beat. "This one's on the house," she said, her cheeks turning pink. "You seem like you could use a pick-me-up." The entire table went silent. My wife Marta's fork stopped halfway to her mouth, a piece of overpriced salmon dangling from it like a dead fish. Her marketing agency colleagues, the usual suspects of ambitious 30-somethings and kiss-ass middle management, all turned to stare at me like I'd just grown a second head. "Well, well," Marta said, setting down her fork, with the precision of a surgeon placing a scalpel. "Looks like someone's still got it." I took a sip of the drink, tasting the sweet and sour mix on my tongue. What can I say? I tip well. Do you now? Jake Morrison leaned back in his chair, that smug smile spreading across his face like butter on toast. Jake was Marta's golden boy at the agency. 37, all teeth and hair product. The kind of guy who probably practiced his handshake in the mirror. Funny, I've never seen you tip more than 15%. "Maybe you haven't been paying attention," I said, meeting his eyes. "I do a lot of things you don't notice." Marta laughed, but it wasn't the warm sound I'd fallen in love with 23 years ago. This was sharp, calculated. "Jealous of you? Please, David. No one even flirts with you anymore." The words hit like a punch to the gut, but I'd learned to roll with Marta's jabs over the years. Marriage was like boxing. You either learned to take a hit or you went down in the first round. "Apparently someone does," I said, raising my glass to the waitress, who was now serving another table. She caught my eye and smiled again. The silence stretched until Victoria, Marta's older sister, cleared her throat. Victoria was 51, divorced twice, and had the kind of sharp intelligence that made you check your wallet after talking to her. She worked as some kind of consultant. The details were always vague, but she seemed to make good money telling other people how to run their businesses. "Maybe we should order dessert," Victoria said, her voice smooth as silk. "I hear the chocolate cake here is to die for." But I wasn't thinking about cake. I was thinking about the way Jake's hand had brushed against Marta's when he'd passed her the wine list. The way she'd been staying late at the office 3 nights a week for the past 2 months. The way she'd started wearing perfume to work, but not around the house. I was thinking about a lot of things, actually. But mostly, I was thinking that maybe it was time to start paying closer attention. The rest of dinner passed in a blur of forced conversation and fake smiles. Jake told stories about his latest campaign success. Victoria made cutting remarks about everyone who wasn't there. Marta checked her phone every 5 minutes, claiming it was work emergencies. I just sat there, sipping my free drink and watching. Really watching, maybe for the first time in years. When we got home to our comfortable colonial in Millbrook, the kind of New England town where half the houses had historical plaques and the other half had security systems, Marta went straight upstairs without a word. I heard the shower running, then the blow dryer, then nothing. I sat in my recliner, the one she'd been trying to get me to replace for 3 years, and thought about the waitress. Not in a creepy way, I wasn't that guy. But there had been something genuine about her smile, something real. When was the last time someone had looked at me like that? When was the last time Marta had looked at me like that? My phone buzzed. A text from my son Ross, away at college. "Dad, can you send me $50? Textbooks are expensive." I typed back, "Sure thing, kiddo. How are classes?" "Good. Mom said you guys had dinner with her work people tonight. How was that?" I stared at the screen for a long time before answering, "Educational." The next morning, Marta was gone before I woke up. She'd left a note on the kitchen counter. "Early meeting. Don't wait up tonight. Team dinner." I made coffee and toast, the same breakfast I'd been eating for 15 years, and tried to remember the last time we'd had breakfast together. The kitchen felt too big, too quiet. Our kids, Ross and Amelia, had both moved out in the past 2 years, leaving behind empty bedrooms and the kind of silence that makes you realize how much of your conversation was about them. At work, I was a senior financial analyst at a regional investment firm. I found myself staring out the window instead of at spreadsheets. Millbrook stretched out below me, all tree-lined streets and well-maintained lawns. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, where secrets had a half-life of about 24 hours. "You look like hell," said Frank Kowalski, poking his head into my office. Frank ran the boxing gym where I'd been working out for the past 5 years, ever since my doctor told me I needed to get serious about exercise. He was 62, built like a fire hydrant, and had the kind of no-nonsense attitude that came from growing up in the wrong part of Boston. Thanks for the pep talk, Frank. I'm serious. You eating? Sleeping? You look like you haven't done either in a week. I leaned back in my chair, studying Frank's weathered face. He'd been married to the same woman for 38 years, had 4 kids and 9 grandchildren. What did he know about feeling invisible in your own life? Can I ask you something? I said, shoot. How do you know when someone's lying to you? Frank's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. Usually, they tell you they're working late when they're not. They start picking fights over stupid stuff. They stop looking you in the eye when they talk. My stomach dropped. Speaking from experience, my second oldest daughter went through a rough patch with her husband a few years back. Took her a while to admit what was really going on. Frank stepped into my office and closed the door. You want to talk about it? I almost said no. Almost went back to my spreadsheets and pretended everything was fine. But something about Frank's steady presence, his complete lack of judgment, made me want to tell the truth for once. I think Marta's having an affair. The words hung in the air like smoke. Frank nodded slowly, as if I'd just confirmed something he'd already suspected. What makes you think that? I told him about the late nights, the phone calls, the way she'd been distant for months. I told him about Jake and the way they'd acted at dinner. I told him about feeling like a stranger in my own house. When I finished, Frank was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "What are you going to do about it?" I don't know. Confront her? Hire a private investigator? Pretend I don't notice? None of those, Frank said. You're going to start paying attention, real attention. And you're going to document everything. Because if I'm right about where this is heading, you're going to need evidence. That afternoon, I left work early and drove to the gym. Frank had me work the heavy bag for 45 minutes straight, until my hands were raw inside the gloves and sweat was pouring down my face. But for the first time in months, my head felt clear. Feel better? Frank asked as I unwrapped my hands. Yeah, actually, I do. Good. Now go home and start paying attention. And David, whatever you find out, whatever happens, don't do anything stupid. Smart men win. Stupid men just make noise. I drove home through the familiar streets of Millbrook, past the coffee shop where Marta and I used to meet for breakfast when we were dating, past the park where we'd taught our kids to ride bikes. Everything looked the same, but something fundamental had shifted. I wasn't just David Henderson, reliable husband and father anymore. I was David Henderson, man with a mission. Marta's car wasn't in the driveway when I got home, even though it was past 7 and her team dinner supposedly started at 6:30. I sat in my kitchen, eating leftover pizza and thinking about Frank's advice. Start paying attention. Document everything. I opened a new notebook, the kind I used for work projects, and wrote down everything I could remember from the past few months. The late nights, the new clothes, the way she'd started going to the gym, but never seemed to lose weight or gain muscle. The credit card bills, I wasn't allowed to see anymore because she'd taken over the finances to give me one less thing to worry about. By the time I finished writing, it was almost 10 o'clock. Marta still wasn't home. I called her cell phone. It went straight to voicemail. Hey, it's me. Just wondering when you'll be home. Call me back. She didn't. At 11:30, I heard her car in the driveway. I was in bed pretending to read when she came upstairs. How was dinner? I asked. Fine, long. You know how these things are. She didn't look at me, just started getting undressed with her back turned. I'm exhausted. Can we talk tomorrow? Sure, but we didn't talk tomorrow. or the day after that. Marta left early, came home late, and filled the space between with text messages and phone calls that she took in other rooms. On Thursday, I decided to do some real investigating. I started with the credit card statements. Marta had taken over paying the bills 6 months ago, claiming she wanted to streamline our finances. But I was still on all the accounts. It took me 20 minutes to reset the passwords and log into our joint credit card. What I found made my blood run cold. Charges at restaurants I'd never been to. A hotel room in the next town over, booked for 3 hours on a Tuesday afternoon when Marta had told me she was in client meetings. Purchases at Victoria's Secret and Nordstrom that I'd never seen come home. But the one that really got me was a charge for $200 at Romano's, the most expensive restaurant in Millbrook. The date was our wedding anniversary. The anniversary Marta had said she was too busy to celebrate because of a crisis at work. She'd celebrated our anniversary all right, just not with me. I printed out 3 months' worth of statements and added them to my notebook. Then I started looking at her phone records. Marta and I had been on the same family plan for years. I'd never bothered to look at the detailed bills before, but now I studied them like they were financial reports. What I found was a pattern. Dozens of calls and texts to the same number, always during work hours, always lasting longer than any business call should. I ran the number through a reverse lookup. Jake Morrison. My hands were shaking as I added this information to my notebook. Part of me had hoped I was wrong, that my suspicions were just middle-aged paranoia. But the evidence was right there in black and white. That evening, Marta announced she was going out with Victoria. Sister bonding, she said, applying lipstick in the hallway mirror. We're going to that new wine bar downtown. Sounds fun. What time will you be back? Not late. Probably around 10. I waited until her car was out of the driveway. Then I called Victoria's house. Her answering machine picked up. Hi, you've reached Victoria. I'm probably out living my best life. Leave a message and I'll get back to you when I feel like it. I hung up without leaving a message and sat in my kitchen, staring at the phone. Either Victoria wasn't home because she was really out with Marta, or Marta had lied about where she was going. There was only one way to find out. I drove downtown to Vine and Dine, the new wine bar Marta had mentioned. It was crowded, full of the kind of people who used words like notes and finish when talking about alcohol. I found a corner table where I could see the entire restaurant and ordered a beer. Marta and Victoria never showed up. But at 9:15, I saw Jake Morrison walk in with a blonde woman I didn't recognize. They sat at a table near the window, holding hands and gazing into each other's eyes like teenagers. I finished my beer and drove home, my mind racing. If Jake was here with another woman, where was Marta? And why had she lied about being with Victoria? I was sitting in my driveway trying to make sense of it all when my phone rang. Marta. Hey, honey. Victoria's not feeling well, so we're calling it an early night. I'm going to stay with her for a while, make sure she's okay. Don't wait up. That's sweet of you, I said, my voice steady, despite the rage building in my chest. Tell Victoria I hope she feels better. I will. Love you. Love you too. I hung up and sat in my car for a long time watching the lights in my house. The house we'd bought together, the house where we'd raised our children, the house that suddenly felt like a museum of a life that no longer existed. The next morning, I called in sick to work and drove to Victoria's neighborhood. Her car was in the driveway, and I could see her moving around in the kitchen, very much not sick. I parked down the street and called Marta. How's Victoria feeling? I asked. Much better. I think it was just something she ate. That's good. Are you at work? Just got here. Busy day ahead. Can I call you later? Of course, love you. Love you too. I hung up and drove straight to Marta's office building. Her car wasn't in the parking lot. I sat there for 20 minutes, watching people come and go, until I saw Jake Morrison walking toward the building. He looked relaxed, well-rested. Not like a man who'd been up late comforting his sick colleague's sister. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Your wife is at the Riverside Motel on Route 9. Room 237. Thought you should know. A friend. I stared at the message, my hands trembling. Someone else knew. Someone else had been watching. I drove to the Riverside Motel, a rundown place that rented rooms by the hour and didn't ask questions. Marta's car was parked behind the building, partially hidden by a dumpster. I sat in my car across the street watching room 237 and tried to figure out what to do next. I could knock on the door, confront them both, make a scene. I could take pictures, gather evidence for a divorce lawyer. I could drive away and pretend I'd never seen anything. Or I could start thinking like the kind of man who wins instead of the kind who just makes noise. I drove home and added everything to my notebook. The phone records, the credit card charges, the lies, the motel. Then I sat at my kitchen table and started planning. Frank was right. Smart men win. And I was done being stupid.
Since when do you carry men's cologne to the gym?
It's my trainer's. He left it.
Your trainer keeps his cologne.
Watch more on Grammarly.com.
The opportunity came sooner than I expected. Saturday morning, Marta announced she was going shopping with Victoria, then having lunch and maybe seeing a movie. Girls' Day, she said, kissing my cheek with the same casual affection she'd show a brother. Don't wait up. I waited exactly 15 minutes after she left, then drove to Victoria's house. Both cars were gone. I called Victoria's cell phone. It went to voicemail. I called Marta. Hey, just wanted to see if you needed me to pick up anything while you're out. We're fine, Marta said. I could hear traffic in the background, but also something else. Music, like the kind they play in hotel lobbies. Victoria's being very particular about lunch spots. You know how she is. I do. Have fun. I drove straight to the Riverside Motel. Both cars were there, Marta's Honda and Jake's BMW, parked side by side like they belonged together. This time, I didn't hesitate. I walked to the office and rang the bell. A tired-looking man in his 60s emerged from a back room, wiping his hands on a greasy towel. Help you? My wife left her purse in room 237, I said, pulling out my wallet and showing him my driver's license. Same last name as the registration. Could you let me in to get it? The man squinted at my ID, then at a ledger on his desk. Henderson, right? Yeah, she's paid up through 2 o'clock. But I can't just let you in without her permission. I pulled out a $20 bill. It'll just take a second. She's at work and can't get away. The man looked at the 20, then at me, then back at the 20. I guess, if you're her husband, he handed me a key. Room 237. Just bring it right back. I walked across the parking lot, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I put the key in the lock and turned it slowly. The door opened to reveal my wife of 23 years, naked in bed with Jake Morrison. They were so focused on each other that they didn't notice me for a full 10 seconds. When Marta finally looked up and saw me standing in the doorway, her face went white. David, she whispered. Jake scrambled to cover himself with a sheet, his face turning red. Jesus Christ, man, what the hell? I stood there for a moment, taking it all in. The cheap motel room with its stained carpet and flickering fluorescent light. My wife's clothes scattered on the floor next to Jake's expensive suit. The bottle of champagne on the nightstand. The same brand we'd had at our wedding. Don't stop on my account, I said, my voice surprisingly calm. I was just returning the key. I tossed the motel key onto the dresser and walked out, closing the door behind me. I returned the master key to the desk clerk, got in my car, and drove home. I felt strangely detached, like I was watching someone else's life fall apart. Marta came home 3 hours later. I was sitting in the living room reading a book when she walked in. We need to talk, she said. Do we? David, please, it's not what you think. I looked up from my book, a thriller about a man who discovers his wife is trying to kill him, which seemed appropriate. What do I think, Marta? She sat down on the edge of the couch, as far from me as possible. It just happened. Jake and I, we didn't plan this. It's just been so hard lately, with the kids gone and us growing apart. And he was there when I needed someone to talk to. How long? What? How long have you been screwing Jake Morrison in cheap motels? She flinched at my language. In 23 years of marriage, I'd never talked to her like that. 3 months, she whispered. 3 months. I nodded as if she'd just told me the weather forecast. And Victoria, is she part of this too? What do you mean? I mean, does she know? Is she covering for you? Helping you lie to your husband? Marta's silence was answer enough. I closed my book and stood up. I'm going to Frank's gym. When I get back, I want you gone. David, please. We can work through this. We can go to counseling. We can... No, I said. Well, we can't. I walked out of the house and drove to the gym. Frank took one look at my face and handed me a pair of gloves. How bad, he asked. As bad as it gets. I spent 2 hours hitting the heavy bag until my knuckles were raw and my shoulders ached. Frank didn't say anything, just held the bag steady and let me work out my rage. When I finally stopped, exhausted and drenched in sweat, he handed me a towel. Feel better? No, but I feel clearer. Good, now what? I sat down on a bench and tried to organize my thoughts. She wants to work it out, go to counseling, pretend this never happened. And you? I want her to pay. Frank nodded. Legal pay or other pay? Legal, smart. The kind of pay that hurts for a long time. Then you need a lawyer, a good one. And you need to be smarter than you've ever been in your life. When I got home, Marta was still there. She'd made dinner, my favorite, pot roast with vegetables, and set the table with our good china. I thought we could talk, she said, really talk. I looked at the elaborate dinner, the candles, the bottle of wine she'd opened. It was like a scene from our early marriage, when we were still trying to impress each other. This is nice, said I said, sitting down at the table. Very thoughtful. Hope flickered in her eyes. I want to make this work, David. I want to save our marriage. Do you love him? The question hung in the air like smoke. Marta's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. What? Jake. Do you love him? She set down her fork and looked at me across the table. For a moment, I saw a flash of the woman I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. Honest, direct, unafraid of difficult truths. Yes, she said quietly. I do. I nodded and took a sip of wine. Thank you for being honest. But I love you too, David. I know that sounds impossible, but it's true. What Jake and I have, it's different. It's exciting and new and makes me feel young again. But what we have is real. It's our life, our history, our children who think their parents have a happy marriage. We can have a happy marriage again. If we both work at it. I finished my wine and stood up. The pot roast is delicious, really. But I'm not hungry anymore. I went upstairs and started packing a suitcase. Marta followed me, standing in the doorway of our bedroom, like she was afraid to come any closer. Where are you going? Hotel. I need some time to think. How much time? I looked at her, really looked at her. She was still beautiful at 48, still the kind of woman who turned heads in restaurants. But something essential had changed. The trust was gone, and without trust, everything else was just performance. I don't know, I said. Maybe forever. I checked into a Holiday Inn on the other side of town and spent the weekend thinking. By Monday morning, I had a plan. It was time to stop being the victim and start being the villain. The first thing I did was call a lawyer. Not just any lawyer. The best divorce attorney in the state, a woman named Patricia Vance, who had a reputation for destroying unfaithful spouses in court. Her consultation fee was $500 for an hour, but she was worth every penny. How long have you suspected? She asked, reviewing the evidence I'd compiled. Months, but I only confirmed it this weekend. Good. The shorter the timeline, the less likely they've had time to hide assets. She leaned back in her leather chair and studied me over her reading glasses. What do you want, Mr. Henderson? Joint custody? Alimony? Or do you want to make them bleed? I want them to understand that actions have consequences. She smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. I can work with that. The second thing I did was start documenting everything. I hired a private investigator, a former cop named Tony Ricci, who specialized in adultery cases. Within a week, he had photographs of Marta and Jake at 3 different hotels, credit card records showing Jake had paid for jewelry that I'd never seen Marta wear, and phone records that would make a divorce judge very unhappy. But the real genius of my plan wasn't the divorce. It was what I did to Jake Morrison. See, I'd done some research on Jake's background. He was ambitious, climbing the corporate ladder at Marta's marketing agency. He drove an expensive car, lived in a condo that cost more than most people's houses, and had a reputation as the golden boy who could do no wrong. He also had a girlfriend. Not Marta, another girlfriend. A 26-year-old account coordinator named Ashley, who thought Jake was going to marry her. I know this because I followed him for 2 weeks and watched him juggle 3 women like a circus performer. Marta on Tuesdays and Thursdays, Ashley on weekends, and a third woman, a client from his biggest account, on Wednesday afternoons. Jake Morrison wasn't just cheating on his girlfriend with my wife. He was cheating on my wife with 2 other women. I started with Ashley. I sent her anonymous photos of Jake and Marta at the motel, along with a note, "Thought you should know what your boyfriend does on Tuesday afternoons." Then, I sent similar photos to the client's husband, a businessman who owned a chain of auto dealerships and had a temper that was legendary in local business circles. Finally, I sent everything to Jake's boss, the CEO of the marketing agency where both Jake and Marta worked. I timed the deliveries so they'd all arrive on the same day, Wednesday at 2 p.m. By Thursday morning, Jake Morrison's life had imploded. Ashley confronted him at work, screaming at him in the lobby, loud enough for everyone to hear. The client's husband showed up an hour later, threatening to pull his account and sue the agency for unprofessional conduct. And the CEO called Jake into his office for a conversation that ended with security escorting him to his car. Marta called me that evening, hysterical. "They fired Jake," she sobbed. "Someone sent photos to his boss, to his girlfriend, to everyone. His career is ruined, David. Ruined." "That's terrible," I said, not feeling terrible at all. "Who would do such a thing?" "I don't know, but whoever it was destroyed him. He can't get another job in marketing, not after this. Word travels fast in our industry." "What about you? Are you in trouble too?" "I'm on probation. The CEO said I showed poor judgment, but I'm a valuable employee, so they're giving me another chance." She paused. "David, I think someone's been watching us, following us. I'm scared." "You should be." The line went quiet. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you should be scared, Marta. You should be terrified. Because whoever did this to Jake isn't done yet." I hung up and poured myself a drink. It was only the beginning. The next phase of my plan involved Victoria. Sweet, manipulative Victoria, who had been covering for her sister's affair and helping her lie to me for months. Victoria worked as a business consultant, which meant her reputation was everything. Her clients trusted her to be discreet, professional, and ethical. If word got out that she'd been helping her sister cheat on her husband, her business would suffer. So I made sure word got out. I created a fake email account and sent a message to every one of Victoria's clients, detailing her role in covering up Marta's affair. I included screenshots of text messages between the sisters, messages that Tony Ricci had somehow obtained through methods I didn't ask about. The messages were damning. Victoria hadn't just known about the affair, she'd encouraged it. She'd provided alibis, made reservations at hotels, and even loaned Marta money for new clothes to wear on her dates with Jake. But the worst message was one where Victoria wrote, "David's such a clueless idiot. He deserves what he gets for being so boring." Within 48 hours, Victoria had lost 3 major clients. Within a week, she'd lost 5 more. Her business was hemorrhaging money, and her reputation in Millbrook's small business community was destroyed. She called me on Saturday morning, her voice shaking with rage. "You son of a bitch," she hissed. "I know this was you." "I have no idea what you're talking about, Victoria. Those emails, those text messages, you're trying to destroy my business. Why would I do that? We're family. Because you're a vindictive, petty little man who can't handle the fact that his wife found someone better," I laughed. "Better? Jake Morrison? The man who was cheating on Marta with 2 other women? That's better." The silence on the other end of the line told me she hadn't known about Jake's other affairs. "That's right, Victoria. Your sister wasn't special. She was just another Tuesday afternoon appointment. But I guess you didn't know that when you were helping her destroy our marriage. You're lying. Ask Marta about Ashley. Ask her about the client from the auto dealership account. Ask her how it feels to be just another name in Jake Morrison's little black book." I hung up and went to the gym. Frank was waiting with a fresh pair of gloves. "How's the war going?" he asked. "We're winning." But I wasn't done yet, not even close. The final phase of my plan was the most satisfying, destroying what was left of Marta's reputation in our social circle. Millbrook was a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business. Marta and I had been part of a tight-knit group of couples for years. People we'd met through the kids' schools, neighbors, work friends. We had dinner parties, went on vacation together, celebrated holidays as an extended family. These people had looked up to us as the stable couple, the ones with the solid marriage who'd made it work through 2 decades and 2 kids. They'd asked us for advice about their own relationships, used us as an example of what marriage could be when both people were committed. I decided it was time they learned the truth. I started small with carefully placed comments at the grocery store, the coffee shop, the gym. Nothing dramatic. Just sad, resigned observations about how you never really know someone, how people change, how difficult it is when a marriage falls apart. I just never saw it coming, I told our neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, when she asked why Marta had moved out. 23 years, and I thought we were happy. But apparently she'd been seeing someone from work for months. Word spread like wildfire by